I can still remember the day I first laid eyes on the Rivercrest Meadows development. A picturesque community in the northeastern United States, it boasted gently curving roads flanked by maples, manicured lawns, and pristine sidewalks. I'd moved here seeking a peaceful environment away from the bustle of big city life. As I turned off the main highway, a tasteful brick sign welcomed me. "Welcome to Rivercrest Meadows, a breath of fresh air." Ironic, in retrospect. At first, I felt relieved. The houses were all neatly spaced, each with a modest yard and just enough architectural variation to avoid the dreary uniformity sometimes found in suburban enclaves. I had a new position, though people didn't know it yet. In fact, I was the newly appointed head of National Respiratory Safety, a federal role that involved coordinating air quality initiatives, monitoring pollution indices, and setting policy for everything from wildfire smoke alerts to industrial pollution thresholds. It was a job that demanded vigilance and an unyielding commitment to public health. No one in Rivercrest Meadows knew this part of my life. My official office was in Washington, D.C., but I could work remotely for much of the year. I hoped to enjoy quiet suburban days while also staying closely attuned to local and national air quality issues. After all, Rivercrest Meadows was rumored to have clean air, minimal traffic, and lots of green space. Perfect for someone who dedicated his life to ensuring others could breathe freely. Unpacking my belongings, I felt a sense of optimism. Neighbors politely waved as they passed. A few introduced themselves as I carried boxes inside. Yet, my real estate agent had offered a faint warning. The HOA here, they're proud of their community standards. One particular member is quite zealous about the rules. That particular member would soon make her presence known. She was Brenda Farnell, though almost everyone privately referred to her as Karen. A middle-aged woman with impeccably coiffed blonde hair, pressed polo shirts bearing the HOA logo, and a no-nonsense expression, Karen was the treasurer of the Rivercrest Meadows Homeowners Association. She carried a clipboard like an extension of her arm, always eager to point out minor infractions or to remind others that HOA guidelines exist for a reason. On my second evening, just as I was trying to relax with a cup of tea, I saw her approaching my driveway, her stride brisk and purposeful. I barely had time to open the front door before she called out in a measured, almost rehearsed tone. "Good evening. You must be our new resident. I'm Brenda Farnell, though you'll hear folks call me Karen. I'm the treasurer of the HOA. I just wanted to welcome you to Rivercrest Meadows and ensure you've read over the official guidelines." Her voice carried a hint of condescension beneath the veneer of politeness. I managed a friendly smile, though my gut tensed. "Yes, I've glanced at them. I'll do my best to follow all rules." Karen offered a tight-lipped nod. "We appreciate residents who do their part to keep our community in top shape. Don't hesitate to call me if you have questions." She paused, scanning my partially open garage door. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, and I could almost hear her mentally cataloging potential violations. Then, with an expression that conveyed faint disapproval, she pivoted on her heel and strode off. I couldn't have guessed how quickly we'd collide over something far more critical than lawn ornaments or paint colors. Within weeks, her overbearing nature would escalate into a crisis, endangering the health of the entire neighborhood, and perhaps beyond. Despite Karen's unsettling introduction, life in Rivercrest Meadows initially proved pleasant. I set up my home office, complete with computers, monitors, and specialized air quality dashboards that connected me to national networks. Each morning, I'd pour a cup of coffee and review real-time data on pollutants, pollen counts, ozone levels, ensuring that the system I oversaw remained accurate and responsive. My position as head of National Respiratory Safety demanded confidentiality. Our agency frequently coordinated with state governments, environmental organizations, and even the military to respond to emergencies like industrial accidents or wildfire smoke events. Though my presence in a quiet suburb might seem incongruous, it was actually perfect for monitoring nationwide data, especially since Rivercrest Meadows had reliable internet infrastructure and was, ironically, known for its fresh air. Neighbors had no clue about my job's gravity. When folks asked, I'd say, "I work for a federal department dealing with health and environment." That was enough to satisfy most. The last thing I wanted was to become the local lightning rod for every environmental concern or to spark curiosity from people like Karen, who would likely interpret my position as an invitation to meddle. Speaking of Karen, she was omnipresent. Whether it was trash day or recycling pickup, she patrolled the streets in her golf cart, a practice I scanning for trash bins left out a minute too long or grass an inch too high. Residents sighed with exasperation but obeyed her dictates, not wanting to incur fines or scoldings. One aspect of the neighborhood that piqued my interest was a small community air monitoring station installed years ago at the edge of the development. It served as an early warning system for local air concerns. High pollen days, smog from the nearest city, or even smoke drifting in from distant wildfires. Residents could subscribe to automated text alerts, each message beginning with Rivercrest Air Quality Alert. I thought it was a brilliant example of community engagement, though I'd soon learn it was also a source of friction for some. I had no reason to suspect that air quality alerts could be a point of contention, until rumors reached me that Karen disliked them. People whispered, "She thinks they cause unnecessary panic." Another neighbor mentioned, "Karen wants everything in Rivercrest Meadows to seem flawless. Alerts about air pollution or high pollen might scare off potential buyers. She thinks it's bad for property values." That struck me as short-sighted and, quite frankly, dangerous. My entire career revolved around the principle that an informed public could protect themselves from respiratory hazards. If pollen counts soared, asthmatics needed to know. If a chemical fire erupted miles away, we wanted residents aware so they could close windows or use air filters. Shutting down such alerts to maintain a facade of perfect living was foolish at best and disastrous at worst. I brushed off the rumors, hoping Karen wouldn't truly try to sabotage the system. But in the back of my mind, alarms were already ringing. If her obsession with appearances outweighed health concerns, we might face a serious clash, and I was prepared to fight for the right to breathe easy. It didn't take long for Karen's hostility toward the air quality alerts to surface publicly. At the next HOA meeting, held in the small community hall near the entrance, I saw a glimpse of how divisive she could be. The hall was modest, with folding chairs arranged in tidy rows and a long table at the front where the HOA board members sat. Karen, as treasurer, was flanked by the president, a genial retiree named Martin, and the secretary, a soft-spoken woman named Alicia. About 30 residents attended, exchanging pleasantries before the meeting commenced. After some mundane business, approving funds for landscaping, scheduling the annual community barbecue, Karen cleared her throat. "I'd like to address an issue that affects our neighborhood's public image," she said, folding her hands primly atop her clipboard. "These so-called air quality alerts are causing unnecessary alarm. We have people fussing over minor fluctuations in pollen or distant smoke. I've heard rumors that prospective buyers question whether Rivercrest Meadows has polluted air. This is nonsense, of course, but perception matters." I bristled. She was using the fear of declining property values to rationalize muzzling a perfectly helpful service. Several residents, especially parents of asthmatic children, exchanged worried looks. Martin, the HOA president, spoke slowly. "Karen, the alerts are run by a local volunteer group, right? They partnered with a small city grant a while ago." She nodded, lips pursed. "Yes, they're volunteer-run, but they use the community's name, Rivercrest Air Quality Alert. I propose we ask them to shut down or rename the service so it doesn't tarnish the neighborhood. If they won't comply, we can file a cease and desist, since they're using our community branding without formal HOA permission." A few murmurs of dissent rippled through the crowd. One resident, a man named Robert, stood up. "My wife has severe asthma. Those alerts help us plan our day, especially on high smog afternoons. We rely on them." Karen offered a syrupy smile. "I understand your concern, Robert, but you can get similar information from the weather reports or from national sites. We don't need a dedicated local alert system painting Rivercrest Meadows as some kind of high-risk zone." Unable to stay silent, I raised my hand. Martin recognized me. "I'm new here, but from what I understand, the local air station is beneficial. People get timely, specific data that the standard weather apps might not offer, especially regarding local environmental factors. I think it's short-sighted to shut it down just to avoid scaring buyers. Don't we want a well-informed community?" Karen's eyes flicked to me, her expression devoid of warmth. "We appreciate your input, but we must prioritize the neighborhood's reputation and property values. The environment is important, obviously, but fearmongering can do real harm. The conversation went in circles for another half hour. Karen insisted the alerts were bad PR, while a handful of residents defended them. Ultimately, Martin tabled the discussion, promising to collect more information before making a final recommendation at the next meeting. Karen's frustration was palpable. She gathered her papers and left the hall abruptly, ignoring neighbors who tried to speak with her. It was clear we'd only delayed the inevitable. Karen was determined to dismantle the alerts, no matter who might be harmed by the loss of critical respiratory information. And, ironically, she had no idea that the person she was sparring with, me, had national authority over air quality programs. If she chose to wage war on public health, she'd soon find she'd picked the wrong opponent. In the days following the tense HOA meeting, small but troubling incidents suggested Karen was already taking steps to undermine the local air quality system. Mysterious error messages. Subscribers began reporting sporadic messages claiming, Rivercrest Air Quality Station offline. Do not use. These alerts were not official transmissions from the volunteer group. When I contacted the volunteer coordinator, she was baffled. We never sent that message, she said. Someone might be spoofing or hacking our system. Misplaced signage. The public sign near the air quality station vanished one morning. It had provided instructions for signing up to the alert system, along with a local phone number to call for daily updates. In its place was a bland, generic poster about beautifying Rivercrest Meadows, with an HOA logo, featuring Karen's name as the contact for any community concerns. Whisper campaign. I overheard neighbors mentioning that Karen had been visiting homes, cautioning families that the alerts were unreliable and sensationalized. She hinted that continuing to rely on them might even violate some unwritten rule about unauthorized data distribution, though no such bylaw existed. Alarm bells rang in my mind. I decided to take a more active role, albeit discreetly. Using my official channels, I updated the national data feed to ensure our broader network still received readings from the Rivercrest station. The local station's hardware was quite basic, but it regularly synced with a county-run server for official environmental records. If Karen escalated her attempts, I wanted to preserve the data at a higher level. Meanwhile, I quietly joined forces with the volunteer group that maintained the station. They were grateful to have a new ally, but they had no idea I wielded federal influence. I kept that detail private, opting to remain the neighbor who cares until I had reason to play my trump card. Late one evening, I walked to the edge of the community where the station was set on a small patch of land. The device, a slender metal tower with sensors, stood near a modest enclosure. An LED readout displayed current particulate matter levels and ozone readings. Everything looked intact, though I noticed fresh footprints in the dirt around the fence. Someone had been here recently, possibly tampering with the lock. My gut told me Karen or one of her recruits had paid a visit. While returning to my house under the flickering glow of street lamps, I mulled over what would happen if Karen actually disabled the system. Shutting off local data wouldn't cripple my entire national network, of course, but it would deprive vulnerable residents of real-time warnings. On top of that, if a major air quality event occurred, say, wildfire smoke drifting from another state, people here might be caught unaware. And that, to me, was unforgivable. Little did Karen realize that if she kept pushing, she'd end up facing not just local opposition, but potential federal legal trouble. Air quality systems, especially those that feed into broader environmental data, are protected by regulations she likely didn't even know existed. A few weeks later, a real test came to Rivercrest Meadows, and it underscored exactly why the air quality alerts were so critical. Summer had arrived in full force, bringing an unexpected heat wave. Coupled with dryness in the region, it created the perfect conditions for wildfires in a neighboring state. Within days, the news began reporting massive plumes of smoke drifting eastward. By midweek, the haze reached our county, tinting the sky an unsettling grayish-brown and carrying a pungent odor of burnt wood. Typically, the local station would blast out a flurry of alerts, smoke advisory in effect, limit outdoor activity, or high risk for asthmatics, stay indoors. But this time, the notifications were sporadic. Some residents received them, others did not. Confusion reigned. Elderly neighbors wandered outside unaware of the heightened particulate matter, while parents of asthmatic kids scrambled to confirm if the air outside was truly dangerous. Alarmed, I checked the station's digital logs. The sensor readings were off the charts, showing hazardous levels of PM 2.5, fine particulate matter. Yet the automated text alerts were being disrupted. More station offline messages went out, sowing doubt about the system's reliability. Meanwhile, local social media threads were flooded with posts like, "Is the air bad? Or is the station just malfunctioning?" And, "I got an alert telling me to stay inside, but my neighbor got a message saying everything is fine." It was a recipe for chaos. Acting quickly, I reached out to the volunteer coordinator. She was frantic. "We've been locked out of our own messaging service," she said. "We can still see the data, but the text alert system keeps redirecting to an error page. We suspect unauthorized changes to our software. We're not sure who's behind it, but it must be local, someone who had access to the system console at the station." I could almost see Karen's smug face in my mind. Or perhaps one of her associates had done the dirty work on her behalf. Either way, the sabotage was real, and it was endangering the health of unsuspecting families. With local air quality turning worse by the hour, I decided it was time to escalate. Using my federal clearance, I placed an urgent call to the county's Office of Environmental Health. I explained that the local station was compromised, asked for immediate technical support, and recommended that the county issue an emergency broadcast. If the local system was down, then the county or state needed to step in to warn everyone. As we hammered out those details, the toll of the sabotage grew evident. A neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Hickson, suffered an acute respiratory episode that evening. His wife tearfully told me the next morning he didn't realize how bad the smoke was. "We didn't get any alert. He stayed outside to do yard work. Now he's in the hospital." Anger flared in me. This wasn't just Karen messing with a harmless service. Real people's lives were on the line. If there was any doubt before, now it was crystal clear. Karen's obsession with perfect appearances was directly harming the most vulnerable among us. I vowed then and there to make sure she faced consequences. The morning after Mr. Hickson's hospitalization, I spotted Karen in her usual golf cart, patrolling the streets. Even from half a block away, I could see the set of her shoulders and the rigidness of her posture. She was on a mission, likely distributing more compliance notices to unsuspecting neighbors. My anger still simmered, fueled by the knowledge that her sabotage had a real human cost. Without overthinking, I walked toward her as she stopped to scribble on her clipboard in front of a home with slightly overgrown shrubs. She noticed me, and her eyes narrowed. "Good morning," she said curtly, pen still in hand. I forced a measured tone. "Karen, we need to talk. About the air quality station." She gave a dismissive sniff. "Oh, I suppose you're here to complain about how it's been malfunctioning. I've heard all about it from neighbors, and it seems the volunteers can't keep it running properly. Maybe that's a sign we don't need it." I took a step closer, lowering my voice to keep the conversation between us. "It's not malfunctioning. It's been sabotaged. Text alerts are being blocked or falsified. This is a serious matter. People rely on those alerts for their health. The smoke situation is dangerous." Karen maintained an air of feigned innocence. "I wouldn't know anything about sabotage, but I do know that constantly alarming texts about toxic smoke do more harm than good. People panic. It's not a good look for the neighborhood." I could barely contain my frustration. Mr. Hickson ended up in the hospital because he didn't get a proper alert. There might be others who suffered. Don't you care about that? She pursed her lips. "I'm sure that's regrettable, but he could have just looked outside and seen the haze. Honestly, do we need a station telling us the sky is smoky? It's not rocket science." I was stunned by her callousness. "You're making assumptions that everyone has the same capacity to interpret the risk. Some people have COPD, asthma. They need precise data to make safe choices. And let's be clear, messing with a system that provides environmental alerts is a federal offense if it's part of a recognized public health network. If you know something, you'd better come clean." Her eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe a mix of fear and indignation. "I'm not intimidated by idle threats. The HOA has the right to protect our reputation." Before I could respond, she revved up her golf cart and sped away. I stood there, heart pounding, the acrid smell of smoke in the air. This wasn't just a neighborhood spat over paint colors or fence heights. Karen was actively endangering lives. and she was either too arrogant or too ignorant to realize she was tangling with laws that could bring her entire world crashing down. By the following afternoon, the county's air quality index, AQI, hovered at an alarming level, well into the unhealthy range. The volunteer group station readings showed toxic levels of particulate matter. Yet the community's localized alert system remained compromised, sending out contradictory messages. The county had broadcast a general advisory, but many Rivercrest Meadows residents still relied on the local texts and were now thoroughly confused. I took action. Leveraging my position as head of National Respiratory Safety, I reached out to the state environmental agency. I explained the sabotage, the hospitalizations. Mr. Hickson wasn't the only one, it turned out, and the suspicion that an HOA official was responsible. The state officials were outraged. Tampering with any recognized air monitoring service was a violation of both state and federal statutes, particularly under the Clean Air Act, umbrella, and public health codes. The next day, a small team from the state arrived in Rivercrest Meadows. They wore official polos with environmental agency logos and carried laptops and diagnostic tools. I guided them to the local station, introduced them to the volunteers, and watched as they uncovered evidence of unauthorized software changes in the alert system. The station's physical hardware was intact, but the messaging interface had been reprogrammed to route text alerts through a hidden server that inserted false notices or blocked genuine ones. Could be an inside job, one technician remarked. Someone with local administrative credentials. We'll track down the IP addresses used to access the system. Their presence caused quite a stir. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some approached warily to ask what was happening. I heard rumors swirling that the feds were investigating wrongdoing in the neighborhood. Karen herself was conspicuously absent that morning, but I suspected she'd heard the news. She was likely fuming or planning her next move. By that evening, the state team had enough data to confirm malicious interference. We're filing an immediate report, the lead technician told me. We'll recommend criminal charges if we can link this sabotage to a specific individual. There's zero tolerance for disabling public health alerts during a crisis. Though Karen's name didn't appear in their official statements yet, it was only a matter of time. The volunteers mentioned that Karen had once demanded administrative access to the station's system, claiming she needed to review it for the HOA. They had refused, but it was possible she'd found another way in. One of the volunteers recalled that a certain younger man, an IT contractor connected to the HOA, had come around the same day the system first malfunctioned. Suspicion grew that Karen had orchestrated the hack. Enlisting outside helped to keep her own hands clean. As the wildfire smoke persisted, more and more residents voiced anger. They demanded the HOA restore the station, punish whoever was responsible, and issue a formal apology. The board, minus Karen, scrambled to contain the fallout, with Martin admitting they'd never authorized any sabotage. People began muttering about removing Karen from the board altogether, but no official decision had been made yet. I observed it all quietly, steeling myself for what was to come. If Karen believed her position in the HOA would shield her from legal consequences, she was mistaken. Soon enough, she'd learn the hard way that tampering with public health systems wasn't just a petty violation. It could land her in serious legal jeopardy. As the air crisis wore on, calls for an emergency town hall-style meeting grew. Residents wanted answers. Why was the local station not functioning properly? Who was behind it? And how could they protect themselves from the lingering smoke? At last, Martin scheduled a special session at the community center. The place was packed, even more so than usual HOA gatherings. Residents overflowed into the hallway, fanning themselves in the summer heat. A few wore masks to filter out the smoky air. The tension was palpable. Karen arrived late, looking every bit the defiant warrior. She wore a crisp blazer, her hair pinned back, clutching a stack of papers. She took a seat at the front table, next to Martin and Alicia, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. I noticed how some neighbors openly glared at her. Martin kicked off the meeting by acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. We've all been affected by the wildfire smoke. We're grateful for the county's general advisory, but we also relied heavily on the local air quality station. It has come to our attention that the station's alerts have been sabotaged. He swallowed hard, as if the mere mention pained him. We're investigating who is responsible and will coordinate with the authorities. One resident stood, voice shaking with anger. My daughter was wheezing so badly yesterday. We had to rush her to urgent care. The volunteer station would have told us to keep her indoors, but we got some nonsense text saying air quality was moderate and no action needed. Murmurs of sympathy rippled. Another resident, Ms. Wu, added, "Yes. My mother has emphysema. She nearly passed out on her walk. How could someone tamper with a health alert system?" All eyes drifted to Karen, who cleared her throat dramatically. "I understand everyone's frustration. But let me be perfectly clear. The HOA never sanctioned sabotage. If there were issues with the station, it's on the volunteers to maintain it properly." A collective murmur of disbelief rose. I couldn't remain silent. Standing, I addressed the crowd. "With all due respect, Ms. Farnell, the volunteer group station was forcibly reconfigured. A state team found evidence of an external intrusion. This wasn't neglect. It was a deliberate act." Karen tried to keep her composure, but I detected a flicker of unease in her eyes. "So you say? Where's the proof that I, or anyone in the HOA, had anything to do with it?" People are quick to jump to conclusions. Just then, one of the volunteers stepped forward, holding a printed log. "We found a suspicious user account created on the day the system first went down. The security question references your name, Miss Farnell." The room erupted in gasps. Karen's face turned ashen. She stammered, This is an outrageous claim. I have no clue who would do that. Anyone could have typed my name to throw suspicion on me." It was a feeble defense, but the tide of public opinion had turned. The outraged parents, the older residents with breathing issues, and even some of Karen's longtime supporters looked unconvinced by her denial. Martin grimly said, "The board will convene an emergency vote on Ms. Farnell's position. If she's found culpable, there will be consequences." Karen's lips formed a thin line. She slammed her stack of papers down and stormed out, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. The meeting adjourned soon after, but not before a few people approached me, whispering thanks for speaking up. I only nodded, my mind buzzing with a single thought. The net was closing in on Karen, and she was bound to lash out again before this was over. In the aftermath of that tumultuous town hall meeting, the sense of unity among the majority of residents grew stronger. The more Karen dug in her heels, the more neighbors rallied to support the volunteer station and call for accountability. Even the HOA President Martin, once timid around Karen, seemed emboldened to check her power. One evening, I received a call from Alicia, the HOA secretary. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. I've been reviewing our finances," she said, "and there are questionable disbursements that Karen approved as treasurer. Funds allocated for community improvements, but never clearly documented. Some suspicious bills for IT consulting services. I'm starting to think that's how she paid whoever sabotaged the station." I thanked her for the information, feeling a surge of hope. If Karen had used HOA money to finance the sabotage, that was a paper trail leading straight to her. It also meant she might face not only air quality tampering charges, but potential fraud or embezzlement charges. I suggested Alicia contact the state investigators or the county sheriff's office, and she promised to do so quietly. Meanwhile, the volunteer group took steps to restore the station. They installed better encryption, changed all passwords, and physically secured the console with a tamper-proof lock. I offered guidance from the sidelines, connecting them with federal guidelines on safeguarding environmental data. For the time being, the sabotage slowed, and the system resumed sending proper alerts about the still lingering smoke. A new wave of appreciation swept the neighborhood as people realized the station was not just an alarmist toy, but a lifeline for those with vulnerable respiratory conditions. Seeing the community band together in support of transparency and public health reassured me that, eventually, Karen's influence would crumble. Then, unexpectedly, I received an email from the CEO of a local medical center. She wrote, "We'd like to thank you for your advocacy regarding air quality alerts in Rivercrest Meadows. We've had an influx of respiratory cases, and the hospital staff is aware that sabotage occurred. If you need any statements or documentation to support a legal case, we stand ready to help." The message was a stark reminder that real lives were at stake. Karen's actions had led to hospital visits, medical expenses, and serious health scares. If she thought she could hide behind technicalities, she was sorely mistaken. Not only were local volunteers, neighbors, and the hospital aligning against her, but I still had the authority and connections at the federal level to ensure she faced the full weight of the law. In the midst of this, I found an unexpected sense of camaraderie with residents I barely knew before. Robert, the father with an asthmatic wife, organized a small thank-you cookout for the volunteers. Ms. Wu shared fresh-baked pastries to show her gratitude. Even the kids who'd once skateboarded recklessly in the streets pitched in, helping pass out flyers about the newly secured air quality station. The entire neighborhood, it seemed, realized how important accurate information was, especially under a threat like wildfire smoke. Karen, on the other hand, grew increasingly isolated. She avoided public appearances, only emerging from her home for brief errands. She'd resigned from patrolling in her golf cart. Rumors said she was speaking to an attorney. It was only a matter of time before her reputation-first mindset collided head-on with the unstoppable force of legal and moral accountability. A crucial turning point arrived on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. In the morning, I noticed a pair of unmarked cars outside Karen's house. Men in suits entered her front door, accompanied by local law enforcement. Neighbors peeked out from windows, uncertain what was happening. I had a pretty good idea. By late afternoon, the news broke across our local network. The district attorney had filed charges against Brenda Karen Farnell for criminal interference with a public health alert system, fraud related to HOA funds, and several lesser counts such as vandalism and unauthorized access of computer systems. The details were damning. Investigators had traced payments from the HOA's treasury to a small tech firm, where an employee admitted to reconfiguring the air quality station's messaging platform under Karen's instructions. The sabotage was extensive, including spamming false alerts to sabotage public trust in the station's reliability. While the suits carefully ushered Karen into a patrol car, her face was pale, her posture rigid. A hush fell over Rivercrest Meadows as people realized this was no mere rumor. Karen was being taken into custody. A statement from the district attorney's office soon followed. Deliberate sabotage of air quality alerts during a recognized health crisis is unacceptable. Our investigation reveals that Ms. Farnell directed illicit modifications to an essential public health system, putting vulnerable residents at risk. She also misused HOA funds for personal ends. We will pursue full prosecution under state and federal statutes. Word spread like wildfire. Residents huddled on sidewalks, discussing the astonishing news. Martin and Alicia, flanked by other board members, held an impromptu meeting to assure everyone that the HOA would cooperate fully with the investigation and that they would rectify any financial mismanagement. A wave of relief, mingled with outrage, swept the neighborhood. Karen's downfall, once unthinkable, was now a public reality. Standing in my driveway, I watched the official cars depart, a swirl of emotions stirring within me. Relief that the sabotage would finally stop. The sadness that a community had been so deeply harmed by one person's obsession with appearances. And a quiet, unwavering satisfaction that justice would be served. With Karen under arrest, life in Rivercrest Meadows shifted rapidly. At first, there was a tangible sense of shock. After all, she had been a constant, albeit intrusive, presence. But soon, a collective sense of freedom emerged. Gone were the daily patrols in her golf cart, the petty citations for overgrown bushes or slightly off-kilter mailboxes. The HOA board moved quickly to suspend Karen from her treasurer duties, pending the outcome of her trial. Alicia took temporary control of the finances, aided by an external auditor to ensure transparency. They uncovered more evidence of Karen's misdeeds, including inflated expense reports and unauthorized reimbursements to consultants never approved by the board. The scale of her self-serving machinations was staggering. Meanwhile, the volunteer group running the air quality station finalized their new security protocols. Thanks to the state's help, the station was fully functional again, sending timely alerts about lingering smoke from distant wildfires. People who had unsubscribed or doubted the service were now flocking back, grateful for accurate information that could protect their family's health. Mr. Hickson returned home from the hospital, doing much better after a close call, and his wife made tearful speeches about how critical local alerts were. The community also took steps to ensure something like this never happened again. A new subcommittee was formed within the HOA, focused on safety and transparency, and they openly invited volunteers to monitor and manage any communal services, from air quality alerts to local crime watch. Martin, the once hesitant president, took a stronger leadership role, openly admitting his regret for not reining in Karen sooner. "It's time we reclaim our neighborhood," he told a gathering of residents in the park. "We owe it to ourselves to be informed and safe." On a personal note, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. For months, I had worried about how to balance my federal authority with local diplomacy. In the end, Karen's arrogance and disregard for public health had sealed her fate. Now I could refocus on my broader duties, ensuring the national networks remained up to date, while also contributing to Rivercrest Meadows as a normal resident, albeit one with a specialized interest in clean air. Though the wildfire smoke persisted at moderate levels, the community was well informed. Parents kept their kids indoors on bad days. Seniors coordinated with neighbors to run errands if stepping outside posed a risk, and the hospital reported fewer respiratory emergencies linked to ignorance of air conditions. It was far from perfect, but it was a vast improvement from the confusion Karen had sown. Even with Karen arrested and initial charges filed, the legal process moved slowly. Over several weeks, the district attorney's office worked to build an airtight case, gathering testimonies from affected neighbors, volunteers, IT experts, and members of the HOA. I provided a statement, though I was careful to limit my involvement to factual details about the sabotage. I didn't reveal every aspect of my federal role in the official statements, focusing instead on my personal knowledge as a resident and the documented evidence from the state environmental team. Alicia and Martin spent long hours reviewing HOA financial records for further irregularities. They discovered Karen had also quietly funneled money into personal home improvements under vague terms like community aesthetic enhancements. That explained the fancy new landscaping around her property. In a neighborhood known for modest lawns, hers stood out like a showpiece, paid, apparently, with HOA funds. One revealing moment came when the IT contractor, whom Karen had hired, stepped forward under pressure from law enforcement. He confessed that Karen specifically instructed him to disrupt the station's text alerts, saying it was a nuisance scaring off prospective buyers. She'd paid him more than his typical rate, all from the HOA's checking account. Public sentiment was firmly against Karen. Even her few old allies avoided defending her once they saw the scope of her wrongdoing. Some neighbors felt betrayed, remarking, "She always acted like she was protecting the community, but she was exploiting us the whole time." Outside of Rivercrest Meadows, regional news outlets picked up the story. HOA official arrested for tampering with wildfire smoke alerts. Commentators debated how suburban associations could become tyrannical when one individual held too much power without oversight. Experts in environmental policy pointed out how vital hyperlocal monitoring could be in crisis situations, precisely the type of system Karen had undermined. Despite the gravity of the case, a strange calm settled over the neighborhood. The sabotage had ended, the station was secure, and steps toward good governance were underway. Some older residents, like Ms. Wu's mother or Mr. Hickson, remarked that they finally felt safer staying informed without fear of manipulated alerts. The community's newfound unity acted like a healing balm, mending rifts that had festered under Karen's rule. Still, we all wondered, would the courts truly throw the book at Karen, or would she somehow evade the worst consequences? None of us could forget her unwavering arrogance. As the trial date approached, rumors swirled that her defense attorney might argue she had acted for the greater good, or that the sabotage was simply misguided enthusiasm. But the evidence told a very different story. When Karen's trial began, the courthouse brimmed with onlookers, reporters, and a quiet sense of anticipation. A handful of Rivercrest Meadows residents arrived early to claim seats, determined to see justice served. Meanwhile, the local volunteer group arranged a small vigil outside, carrying placards that read, "Clean air is a right," and "Stop the sabotage." Inside, the prosecutor laid out a damning narrative. Karen had willfully tampered with the air quality alert system during a period of dangerous smoke pollution, causing confusion and potentially life-threatening situations for vulnerable residents. She had also embezzled HOA funds to finance the sabotage, funneling money under phony IT consulting invoices. Witness after witness testified about the confusion, hospital visits, and general distress inflicted by her actions. Karen's defense tried to spin a tale of misunderstood intentions. They argued she believed the local station was unnecessarily alarmist and had only sought to provide balanced information. They painted the HOA fund's misuse as financial oversight, not outright fraud. Karen herself took the stand, claiming she had been harassed by environmental extremists and that she had a duty to protect the neighborhood from panic. She never once acknowledged the suffering her sabotage had caused, nor did she show remorse. It didn't help that the prosecution showed screenshots of internal emails and text exchanges between Karen and the IT contractor, where she explicitly instructed him to disable or falsify alerts. One message read, "We need those panic messages to stop, even if it means shutting the system down entirely." That kind of evidence was hard to refute. I was called to testify briefly about the real-time data the station collected and why shutting off or altering those alerts was dangerous. I explained in layman's terms how families with respiratory issues depend on timely, accurate warnings. The defense tried to discredit me as just another resident, but the prosecutor revealed I had professional expertise in air quality. I maintained composure, never fully disclosing my top-tier federal role, but emphasizing that interfering with public health alerts was morally and legally indefensible. By the time closing arguments wrapped up, the sense in the courtroom was clear. Karen's claims didn't stand up to the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for only a day before returning a guilty verdict on most charges: tampering with an essential public health system, computer fraud, misappropriation of funds, and reckless endangerment. The judge, clearly disgusted by Karen's lack of remorse, remanded her into custody pending sentencing. A week later, Karen was brought back to court for sentencing. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke of her behavior. "Miss Farnell, you chose to prioritize aesthetics and property values over the well-being of your community. You sabotaged a system that could have saved lives. Worse, you stole from the very neighbors you claim to represent. This court finds your actions not merely negligent, but willfully dangerous." With those words, the judge pronounced Karen's sentence: 3 years in state prison, followed by probation. She was also ordered to pay significant restitution to the HOA, effectively forcing the sale of her property to cover the stolen funds and other damages. The final blow to her pride, the home she had so carefully cultivated, with immaculate landscaping funded by ill-gotten money, would no longer be hers. Reporters covering the verdict snapped photos of Karen as she stood in handcuffs, head bowed, a far cry from the confident enforcer who once patrolled Rivercrest Meadows in a golf cart. A hush fell over the courtroom, broken only by the quiet sobs of a relative in the gallery. Karen herself remained silent, her face an unreadable mask. Whether she felt regret or just bitterness, no one could be sure. Back in Rivercrest Meadows, the news of her sentencing was met with relief and, for some, lingering sadness. People had known Karen for years, but apparently never realized how extreme her methods could become. Nonetheless, the consensus was that justice was necessary. Residents no longer feared petty fines or sabotage. They spoke openly of forging a more compassionate HOA culture, one that prized transparency and actual community spirit over petty image control. In the weeks following Karen's sentencing, Rivercrest Meadows experienced a renewal of sorts. A special HOA election was held, and new board members were voted in. People who campaigned on openness, collaboration, and public health awareness. Martin remained as president for now, pledging to redeem the HOA's mission after the scandal. The volunteer-run air quality station thrived. New donors stepped up to fund updated sensors and better software security, ensuring no sabotage would ever again bring it down. The alerts continued to help residents navigate lingering smoke from distant wildfires and later, heavy pollen days during the transitional seasons. Mr. Hickson and his wife led a neighborhood watch for health-related concerns, calling it the Rivercrest Care Circle. They circulated weekly bulletins on safety, from heat waves to flu shots, demonstrating a new, more caring approach to community issues. The hospital, which had seen a spike in respiratory cases during the sabotage, worked closely with the volunteers to educate residents about air filters, masks, and best practices for vulnerable individuals. Though Karen's house went on the market, no one felt much longing for her presence. A handful of neighbors admitted to mixed emotions. She had once been a friend, a block captain, someone they shared potlucks with. But the harm she caused was too great to overlook. The community, forging ahead, embraced a spirit of empathy instead of intimidation. As for me, I continued my work in national respiratory safety, quietly ensuring that the lessons learned in Rivercrest Meadows could guide other communities. We updated our best practices manual for small local stations, highlighting the need for robust security measures and advising on how to handle sabotage or misinformation. The story of Rivercrest served as a case study in what could go wrong and how determined citizens could right those wrongs. One crisp autumn evening, a few months after Karen began her prison term, I found myself strolling along the neighborhood's main road. The haze from the wildfires had long dissipated, replaced by cool breezes carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Pumpkins and harvest decorations adorned porches. Families laughed and chatted outdoors without the fear of choking air. I paused near the air quality station, recalling the turmoil that had once engulfed it. The LED screen glowed softly, reading AQI 42 good, a testament to the fact that, for the moment, we could breathe easy. In my line of work, I'd always believed knowledge was power. Empower people with data, and they can make informed decisions about their health. That principle applied whether you were dealing with a national crisis or simply deciding whether to take a morning jog. Karen's sabotage was a stark reminder that withholding or distorting information can do more harm than any natural threat. I understood that the psychological impetus behind her actions wasn't entirely unique. Many communities have a Karen, someone so fixated on outward appearances that they ignore genuine needs. The difference here was how far she was willing to go and how destructive that single-minded pursuit became. I lingered a bit longer, feeling a certain gratitude for all those who stepped up, the volunteers who fixed the station, the neighbors who demanded accountability, the officials who pursued justice. This small device in front of me, once threatened, now stood as a symbol of resilience and shared responsibility. I continued my walk, noticing that porch lights glowed warmly, and in some windows, I caught glimpses of families spending time together. The tension that once gripped Rivercrest Meadows had eased. We had come through a storm, literally and metaphorically, and emerged a closer, stronger community. News of Karen's case and conviction didn't just stay local. State and national outlets picked it up, highlighting it as a cautionary tale about HOAs overstepping their bounds and the critical importance of local environmental alerts. Some of my colleagues in federal agencies reached out to me directly. "We read about that sabotage incident in your community. Can you share insights?" I complied, providing a measured account without revealing personal vendettas. Environmental organizations cited Rivercrest Meadows as a prime example of why communities should support, not suppress, local air quality monitoring. A respected nonprofit invited the volunteer group to speak at a regional conference, where they described how quickly sabotage could escalate and how public unity was essential to restore trust. In a broader sense, the entire fiasco catalyzed conversations about accountability within HOAs. Many neighborhoods across the country started re-examining their bylaws, ensuring that no single individual could unilaterally threaten critical services. Legal experts weighed in, pointing out that if sabotage had led to a tragedy, a child or elderly resident dying from respiratory complications, Karen's charges could have been even more severe. Some asked if the punishment was too harsh, 3 years behind bars, plus losing her property. But the majority opinion favored a strong deterrent. Let it be known that willfully endangering public health would not go unpunished. Indeed, the restitution she had to pay the HOA for stolen funds and misappropriated resources left her financially ruined. It was a humbling fall for someone who once strutted around, brandishing fines for minor lawn issues. Inside Rivercrest Meadows, the sense of normalcy returned. Without Karen's constant watch, residents breathed easier, both literally and figuratively. The shift wasn't about abandoning all rules. The HOA still had guidelines, but they were enforced with fairness and community input. That difference in tone made a world of difference to morale. Sometimes, while passing Karen's former home, now listed under a bank's management, sporting a for sale sign, I'd reflect on how swiftly illusions of control could collapse. Karen had believed she was safeguarding the neighborhood's image, yet she nearly brought it to ruin. In a quest to hide the truth about environmental conditions, she exposed the entire community to real danger. With the immediate crisis behind us, I found renewed energy for my national role in respiratory safety. The events in Rivercrest Meadows had clarified, more than ever, why local data and local vigilance mattered. People needed to trust their alerts and see them as allies, not fear them as marketing liabilities. I spearheaded an initiative within my department, pushing for grants to help small communities set up robust air quality monitors, complete with cybersecurity guidance, so no other Karen could tamper with crucial alerts. The success story of our neighborhood's volunteer station became part of the pitch. Look at how it helped, even when threatened by sabotage. Imagine if every community had that resilience. Within a year, we saw multiple pilot programs rolling out across different states. The collaboration between local volunteers, municipal governments, and national agencies was heartening. A rural county in the Southwest dealing with frequent dust storms implemented a system reminiscent of Rivercrest's, and it saved countless residents from respiratory complications. A Midwestern town prone to industrial pollution used similar technology to reduce hospital visits by alerting people early about toxic plumes. Every time I read about these successes, I couldn't help but think back to the day I confronted Karen in the street, her golf cart rumbling as she dismissed the importance of those alarmist alerts. Had she not tried to sabotage them, would we have gained this momentum, this national spotlight on community-driven air quality awareness? Fate has a strange way of turning adversity into progress. At local gatherings in Rivercrest Meadows, people sometimes joked, "We have to thank Karen for teaching us how not to run an HOA." The entire fiasco became neighborhood lore, a reminder that knowledge is power and that any attempt to hide or distort critical information can have dire consequences. Seasons passed, and Rivercrest Meadows evolved. The volunteer station remained a cherished fixture, offering daily bulletins on everything from ozone levels to pollen spikes. The new HOA board formed alliances with public health groups, ensuring a transparent flow of information. When the wildfires finally died down and the skies cleared, the station pivoted to general updates, mold spore alerts in damp autumn months, or wintertime spikes in particulate matter from wood-burning stoves. Karen's house eventually sold to a young couple who seemed excited to join a community that valued both neighborly camaraderie and accurate public health data. They painted the exterior a soft gray, replaced some of Karen's extravagant landscaping with a simpler garden, and quickly became friends with families on the block. Watching them settle in, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The community was truly shedding the last vestiges of Karen's toxic legacy. My personal life also flourished. Freed from tension and big battles at my doorstep, I spent more time on hobbies, like weekend hikes in nearby nature preserves or quiet evenings reading on my porch. Neighbors would pass by, wave, and sometimes chat about the air quality readings that day. They knew me as someone who cared, but few ever learned I was the top official for national respiratory safety. They didn't need to know. This was a place for me to be an ordinary resident, albeit one with some specialized knowledge. Occasionally, I'd receive a letter or email from someone who'd read about the Rivercrest sabotage. They'd ask for advice on dealing with a local official trying to shut down environmental alerts or overshadow factual data with their own spin. I always gave the same guidance: gather evidence, trust the law, and rally the community. The lesson from Rivercrest was that a unified, informed citizenry can overcome even the most overbearing authority figure. A year after Karen's sentencing, Rivercrest Meadows organized a festival called Breathe Easy Day, dedicated to raising awareness about respiratory health. The event took place in the Central Park, with booths from local clinics, environmental groups, and the volunteer station showcasing new sensor technology. Children played games related to clean air, while adults listened to presentations on everything from wildfire preparedness to allergen-proofing homes. Standing beneath a canopy of tall oak trees, I watched families laugh and learn, grateful for how far we had come. No longer plagued by sabotage or fear-mongering, the neighborhood genuinely embodied its original slogan, a breath of fresh air. In the distance, the small tower that housed the air quality sensors stood tall, sunlight glinting off its metal surface. A sign near its base read, "Rivercrest Air Quality Station, keeping our community safe, one alert at a time." My thoughts drifted back to the day I first met Karen at my doorstep. How she had seemed so poised, so sure she was upholding the best interests of the community. Then came the day I confronted her about Mr. Hickson's hospitalization, her dismissive shrug speaking volumes about her misplaced priorities. Now, she was in prison, stripped of the power and property she once held so dear. Perhaps, in some far-off future, Karen would reflect and realize she had been on the wrong side of history. Perhaps not. Either way, Rivercrest Meadows had grown stronger by confronting her. The story of her sabotage would live on as a reminder that ignoring or denying environmental realities doesn't make them go away. Only collaboration and honesty can keep a community safe. I took one more deep breath, savoring the crispness of the air, free from the haze and free from the tyranny of a misguided neighbor. Then I walked over to help a group of teenagers set up a display about the importance of clean air for sports and outdoor play. Life continued, the community thrived, and the quest to protect public health, my life's work, remained more vital than ever.